Okay, greetings and peace, everyone. Welcome to the Committed Relationships and Spiritual Activity YouTube channel. I am your host, Neo, and I'm here to share some info with the people. Now, this information here that I'm going to share with you guys it comes from my years of studying relationships and years of studying my nieces and nephews. I must tell you and let you guys know that I have 9 nieces and nephews, mostly female, and it has provided me an immense amount of time to study children, to study parenting, and that is my close experience, first and foremost, along with actually studying other people in a variety of other different ways, and studying them as parents and studying their children and seeing what affects children and what doesn't affect children from the time that they are born all the way until times they're in their teens and 20s. So, and my oldest niece is, I think, 19 going on 20 now, something of that nature. And so I have a close experience with this information, and with my personal development work that has allowed me to clear out a lot of my unresolved mental issues. I have increased my mental clarity, allowing me to have a high level of analytical ability so that I can be able to manage all of this information that I have received. That is one thing that people have to do, is to be able to clear out their mental issues that have been clouding out their focus, because mental issues can literally limit people in a variety of ways from being able to be objective when they're observing people, because being objective helps out greatly to be able to analyze information. But if you're too tied into a situation emotionally, you're too attached, you won't be able to think clearly. So what I want to talk about is false parenting. What are you teaching your children? There are a lot of people, and I'm telling you, there are a lot of people who have not reached an adequate level of maturity before they have their children. And there's a variety of reasons for this. However, somehow, some way, there's always a way that causes a person to end up having children, whether they was in a relationship where they actually loved the other person and they decided to have children. They were actually in a relationship, they was in love with each other, and they had sensual sex and they forgot to protect themselves, or they just wanted to give it a try without having protection because of the feeling, and then they ended up having a child. Some people, they go through situations where they were molested, they were raped, and it's a variety of different reasons. However, in particular, I'm speaking about those individuals who are in a relationship, or they just decide to have sex and they say that they want children when they actually are not ready. And the ones who actually have a choice to say no and avoid having children. These individuals, a lot of people, they fail to actually think clearly before they have children. And when they do think at least a little bit, they don't understand the psychological aspect of parenting, and they don't even understand the psychological aspect of relationships. There is a great deal of psychological activity that needs to be dealt with when it comes to parenting. And if a parent, a person, or people do not understand that aspect of maturity before they have children, they are going to have a much more greater difficulty and stressful time being a parent throughout the time of parenting. And also their behavior is going to be on a much more immature level, to where they say and do a lot of immature, disrespectful things to their children, when in actuality, they are supposed to be the mature individual to be able to pass on the maturity and guidance to their children so that their children can have a less stressful time throughout their childhood and their teenage years so that they can transform into mature adults psychologically. However, throughout history, many, many years, this has not been the case for many people who have children. There are so many people who literally abandon their responsibilities as a parent, involving they have to literally take care of the child more than just providing the physical needs. That's providing food, shelter, and clothing. A lot of people fall for that image and that belief that TV shows, movies, and their parents, where they think that that's all a part of parenting, and that's just it. It's just those three things: food, shelter, and clothing. Looking at parenting that way and just thinking that that's just parenting, that is actually just a provider. You are a provider. If that's all you provide your children and there's no psychological and emotional and spiritual aspect that you are providing, you are just a provider. My parents were just providers. My father officially left my life at the age of 16, and before that he was in and out of my life, and he and my mother divorced when I was the age of 4, so I don't really remember too much of my father as far as providing a strong parental guidance. Because years later, when I was 27 and I decided to have a dinner with him, which I had to initiate, after speaking with him, I realized, like, wait a minute, okay, this is still a young boy. He's like 50 years old, but he literally psychologically is still a young boy, and he did not find himself. He did not mature. So, and he married my mother extremely young when they were in the teenage years. And if people failed to mature psychologically, and if they didn't have any kind of guidance from their parents or whoever they were around as their caretakers, then getting married and having a committed relationship in general within their teenage years or early 20 years is a big, huge no-no. Because there's a lot of people who are within that age range from your teenage years into your early 20s. You are still you still are an emotional wreck unless you have had some psychological training to be able to deal with the different hormones that come online within our own body and our brain developing. A lot of people don't realize that within your teenage years, your brain is still developing. I had to be taught that spiritually because I did not have the parental guidance from my mother. My mother was all around her mind was on work, focusing on bringing in the money to help us survive, which that's good to a certain extent. But as a parent, especially as a single parent, you have to take on the extra load of the other parent. So you have to have an even more psychological strength than if you had another half to help you out. So you have to have double, if not triple, psychological strength, and you have to have a high level of psychological stamina to be able to spread yourself. If you don't have these things, you're going to stretch yourself thin, and that's what a lot of single parents end up doing. They stretching themselves thin, and then they try to pass off their children off to other people. Like you have the single mother, especially if she's young, like in her teenage years or in her 20s, she'll pass on her child to her mother or her father or even her grandmother. They do that often, and then there's little to no connection with their children because they kept passing them on to everybody else. Me, I was passed on to my aunt, one of my aunts, the oldest aunt, and a variety of my different aunts because my mother was always at work. And then years later, after doing my personal development work and analyzing myself, my life, and my mother, I realized and especially the stuff that I heard from my aunts telling me about my mother, I realized, like, wow, no wonder why I'm not close with my mother's, because my mother always pushed me off to everybody else. And then when we were together, she really wasn't spending one-on-one time with me, giving me that love and affection that a parent in general needs, and that mature guidance. So it's like, no wonder why, number one, I didn't have a great close relationship, and still don't have one with my mother or either of my parents. And also no wonder why it took me so long to actually psychologically mature. I started really maturing at the age of 25, and the closer I got to 30, that's when my maturity just kept rising and rising higher up. And that's after I actually moved out of my mother's house into my own apartment, and that was at the age of 23, 24, somewhere around that age. And that was because I wanted to focus more on my music so I can get away from her negativity, because again, that psychological personal development work definitely helps, because if the parent does not get that situated before having children, they're going to pass those issues on to their children, and they're going to project their hatred that they had of their parents and any other issues that they had of and with their parents, and any other past experiences that they have suffered from negatively, and that gave them negative beliefs and limiting beliefs. They will pass that on to their children. That's why you have a lot of parents that will beat their children disrespectfully for literally petty reasons, if not no reason. They'll just bam, 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 just beat them in the head for, like, in ridiculously ways, in ridiculously amounts, smacking them in the head with something extremely hard. You'll just see them go willy-nilly, especially in public. A lot of parents have a lack of control, and that's because of their mental issues. And then those mental issues, they get passed on to their children, both due to the behavior of the parent, but also the DNA that they pass on to their children. Let me tell you this, throughout my studying, I got to tell you this, and this is something that most parents do not understand. Our DNA is a recording mechanism, and our actions, our thoughts, our emotions are recorded onto our DNA. When a person decides to have children, whether it be consciously or unconsciously, whatever situation that happens, they pass on their DNA, of course, right? And that's the reason why the children sometimes resemble the parents. But they also pass on their thoughts, their beliefs, and their emotions to their children through that DNA. This is the reason why it's extremely wise to pay close attention to who you are deciding to have children with. If you decide to have children with someone who will have mental issues and who have a lot of internal conflicts, that your children are going to have those internal conflicts also in one way or another, including you. If you have those internal conflicts and you have not resolved those to where you changed your DNA and you cleaned it up and you have a much more clean, pure DNA, pure thoughts, then you're going to pass that on to your children. A lot of people fail to truly understand this, and then when they see those same inner conflicts in their children that their mate has and also that they have themselves, a lot of times parents, they'll freak out in one way or another. They go, and then I don't want to see that. And internally they don't want to see it, so they try to do a variety of different things to cover it up, or they'll point fingers at the child and they'll blame the child and say, you're not this, you're not that. I'll give you an example. My mother would always say that I was selfish throughout my teenage years and my early 20 years, while at the same time she never actually spoke to me about giving and being generous with other people. And she didn't teach me communication. All of these things that I'm teaching here on this channel are all things that I literally had to do throughout my personal development journey on my own. And I spent years by myself reflecting on myself and figuring out what I need to resolve within myself. Once I did that and I reached to a higher psychological level, I was able to perceive all of the different things that people have failed to resolve within themselves. And it's almost an instant thing for me, because getting on a higher psychological level, you reach certain psychic senses also, to the point now I could just encounter a person in one way or another. They can walk into a room, I can see a picture of them, and I can talk to them on the phone, I hear their voice, and I can hear all of the different psychological issues that they have. And my mother is one of the many parents that would consistently complain about their children, but at the same time they fail to teach their children how to resolve those things that they're complaining about. So it's like, how can you complain to a child about being selfish and not communicating and not helping other people out when you haven't actually sat down and taught them that and consistently teach them that? It's consistency. Patience is a part of mature parenting. If you have not reached mature patience, strong patience within yourself, then you should not have children at all. You have to develop that patience, because the children, you got to keep in mind that they're just coming into this world. This world is new to them to a certain extent, because there's some of us who've been here many times, but you have to readjust to these new experiences, and you have to readjust to your new people that you have in your life. So a child isn't gonna just know how to be an adult without having mature adults around them teaching them mature adulthood. So you can't point to a 6-month-old or a 1-year-old and say to them, look, before you go outside, you have to put on your shoes. You have to tie your shoes, you have to put them on, and then walk out the door. Okay, well, how can they know how to do that if they, number one, never seen that you do that, and also number two, you actually sit down with them over and over again, teaching them how to put on their shoe and how to tie their shoe. This is exactly what's been going on for years with parents. And not only parents, you got head coaches, you got teachers, principals, and a lot of other people saying, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to communicate, you got to communicate. Well, you got to keep in mind that there's a lot of parents that have not taught their children how to communicate, how to deal with conflict, how to avoid conflict, so that you can have successful and meaningful relationships with other people. These are so many things that's going on that people lack doing, and they fail to do it, but they, at the same time, they expect their children to do it, to do these things, and they expect other people to know how to do these things, and then they expect to have a successful, meaningful relationship with other people when they themselves don't understand these things. So that's one thing I never really understood throughout my years of studying relationships, is a lot of people, they know that they have mental issues, unresolved mental issues, and they know the importance of fixing themselves, getting themselves fixed, getting some kind of therapy. But at the same time, they fail to do that, and they fail to put in some kind of work. But yet, they go around wanting successful, meaningful relationships with other people, and they expect to have other great people to come into their life and want to be with them. Like, really, does that really make sense? So, for example, let's just say a person who is completely chaotic psychologically, and they know it, and they know they have moments of chaos where they'll just explode over petty stuff, quick petty stuff, to the point where the people that are around them feel like they have to walk on eggshells. Now, let's say a great person who has done all of the personal development work, they are psychologically stable and they have a lot to offer a relationship with an individual in general. And that includes psychologically, first and foremost, emotionally and spiritually. Now, from the start, why would a person want to subject themselves to such harsh potential experiences dealing with this other individual and jump into a relationship with them so quick off the bat? Whether it be just because they have a lot of money, just because they look good, or they're giving, but at the same time they're completely psychotic. Now, if you think about it, on average, nobody wants to be with a known psychotic individual unless they see that there's some kind of benefit from it, but they don't want to subject themselves to tragic, unnecessary immaturity and ridiculous experiences. So, and it's baggage that comes with a lot of people. So it's like, if you know you have baggage, psychological and emotional baggage, then why should you go ahead and try to bring people into your life unless you are actually trying to improve yourself and you want help from those individuals? And if you do want help, say that from the beginning. Don't just try to bring them in there and then throw your baggage on them, get them in trouble just by being around you when you're not seeking help from them. And you have to want help for yourself. So this is all situations that people have to resolve before having children. And these individuals who fail to do these things, put in the personal development work, the psychological work, and getting some kind of therapy somehow, some way, and consistently working on their personal development. And personal development is self-analysis, self-reflection, self-analysis, and personal development also includes the action. You have to put in the work. You have to focus on changing. If you know that your communication is terrible, then you have to study communication and study people who actually communicate well and know how and when to speak up. And also having the strength to say no. I have family members who don't know how to say no, and that's why a lot of people take advantage of them. And some people don't realize that the other person doesn't know how to say no when certain things happen. So it's ridiculous, the stuff that children have to go through just because of their silly parents didn't do the personal development work and consistently fail to get their mind right. The mind is serious. The mind is all. You have to get that stable before you think you could be a parent, before you think you can go ahead and have that career that you always wanted, whether it be an NBA player, whether it be an NFL player, a music artist, especially have your own business. Because if you want your own business, if you're not psychologically stable, then you're definitely going to have a stressful time throughout that experience. So you got to get that right. So the question is like, what are you teaching your children? A lot of people haven't even been teaching them life lessons. That's what you have to focus on first and foremost, is teach your children life lessons that they can actually utilize in their life so that they can avoid avoidable life situations. Because there's a lot of things in life that you can avoid if you had the right mindset and the right knowledge. Teach your children life knowledge before you worry about teaching them sports. And some people are obsessed with teaching their children sports, teaching them music when they haven't even taught them maturity, taught them how to communicate well, how to be articulate, express themselves well. And, I mean, you got to look at a lot of these high school students, these teenagers. They have a difficult time articulating their emotions to the teachers, to other people. And it's sad seeing these teenagers, the stuff that they had to go throughout their life with their silly little parents or their family, their immature family. And for me, I'm glad that I got out of that situation with my mother and her ridiculous father issues that she used to put on me heavily when I was young. And when I was young, I didn't understand it, but now I understand it and I could protect myself from it. And that's why I limit my exposure to my mother, because I know that she's still psychologically a child. She's a 60-year-old child. I call some people 60-year-old children. That's another thing I want to tell you before I go, is just because a person is of older age does not mean that they are psychologically mature and that they are an adequate leader. Psychological maturity is the first and foremost important thing that a person must have before they do a lot of things. So keep that in mind, and don't think that just because a person is 60 years of age that they are wise. I'm telling you, nowadays there are a lot less wise 40, 50, 60, and 70-year-old people, because back in the days, studying this in the 60s, the 70s, in the 80s, and even the 90s, there was wise individuals. But now world societies, and especially here in America, has done a lot of work to dumb down people's minds of the world. So don't always run to these older people just because they're of older age. You have to really understand what maturity is and understand and be able to identify who is psychologically stable and intelligent versus the ones who are still immature and their psyche is all over the place. So they can't be able to focus on a task that needs to be done and to be able to avoid conflict and be able to learn how to deal with conflict. So you got to be able to pay attention to all these things and pay attention to how people communicate, and if they communicate well within their relationships and group settings. But all right, that's enough. I'm gonna go ahead, and I went a little bit further than I really wanted to as far as the time. If you would like to communicate with me, you can do so at my CommittedRelationships@gmail.com email. I'm always open to various communications depending on the situation, because for some people a consultation might be necessary. So you can email me at CommittedRelationships@gmail.com. That will be in the description, and same with my links to my other websites. That will be in the description also. Definitely, if you would like to hear more relationship and personal development information, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and also the bell button next to the subscribe button so that you can get updated with my future videos. Thank you, and until next time.